Hello everybody and welcome to today's lesson on deductive reasoning. This is the fourth and last lesson in our Unit 1 on logic reasoning, and today's objectives will be I will be able to use valid forms of deductive reasoning, including the law of syllogism and the law of detachment. I will also be able to determine the validity of a logical argument. So first, let's remember what deductive reasoning is. Deductive reasoning is the process of forming a logical argument by using facts, definitions, accepted properties, theorems, postulates, all that good stuff in a logical order to form a logical argument. There are two laws that we use to form a deductive logical argument, and one of them is called the law of detachment. The law of detachment uses one fact only, and it's usually constructed like this. Given if P, then Q, P is true, and the conclusion of that is therefore, remember we use our three dots arranged in a triangle, therefore Q is true. For the law of detachment, think about detached. Detached means separated from everything else, right? We're using one fact only, not a number of facts, as in the other law that we will discuss in a moment. One fact only, that's the law of detachment. It is very important that we use P and Q in the order that they are in. P is the hypothesis, and P has to be also the link to the conclusion. Q is the second part of this logical argument. Always remember to keep this order. Well then, let's look at an example. Use deductive reasoning to determine a valid conclusion to the following statements. If it is Friday, then the cafeteria sells pizza. Tomorrow is Friday. The valid conclusion from this argument is, therefore, the cafeteria will sell pizza tomorrow. Okay, let's think about truth versus validity for a moment. A statement can be true or false. An argument consists of various statements that are true or false. So in the example above, we have statements, right? And we have the whole thing makes up an entire argument. The argument is valid if the conclusion follows logically from the given hypothesis. It doesn't matter whether the statements were true or false in themselves, but if together logically they form a conclusion which follows the laws of logic, then the argument is valid. This is very important to remember. Let's move on to our next example. Determine whether the argument is valid or invalid and explain your reasoning. If I walk in the rain, then I get wet. I got wet, therefore I walked in the rain. If you look at this, you see that the argument starts with the statement, if I walk in the rain, and that should also be the statement which forms the link to the conclusion. If we write this in symbolic notation, it may be a little easier to realize and to understand. I walk in the rain is P, and I get wet is Q. So in other words, if P, then Q. Now what follows thereafter is Q. I got wet. And the conclusion they came up with is, therefore, I walked in the rain. So you see what actually happened here, right? If you look at this piece, then actually they are using Q leads to P. If Q, then P. And that is actually the converse. Changing my colors here so you can see it a little better. The converse, as you remember from our last lessons, is not necessarily true. And you also remember our sneakers converse means we switch the order. This is if Q, then P. And since the converse is not always true, it may be true, but it's definitely not always true, that means that the argument that was made based on this is actually invalid. Alright, now go on watch the second video on the law of syllogism to conclude today's lesson.